3 notes reaching upwards, only to be tugged downward by the fourth. Shell-shocked, the rest of the phrase meanders, attempting to rediscover itself before the other voices enter, one by one, all in imitation of the first. Before we realize it, we're in the midst of a complex web of interconnected lines, sometimes working together, sometimes argumentatively. This is a fugue, something Beethoven explored in great depth in the last movement of the preceding Opus 130. But that fugue was full of bombast, of grandiosity. Here the fugue is intimately contemplative. Richard Wagner called it surely the most melancholy ever to have been expressed. This is how Beethoven begins his Opus 131 string quartet, a wildly experimental yet emotionally vivid and awe-inspiring work. Much of the experimental quality has to do with its structural and formal aspects, yet its capacity for emotive intensity is undeniable. The quartet is in 7 parts, a culmination of its expansion of form that we already see in Opus 132 and 130. Yet, if we take a closer look, in many ways Opus 131 is actually in 4 main sections, reflecting that of a, quote, traditional quartet form. Perhaps what's more revolutionary than the mere number of movements is the fact that everything is to be played through without any large pauses. The 7 parts create one singular narrative without a break. Beethoven threads this long and continuous journey motivically as well, utilizing the interval of a half step in crucial ways throughout the entire work. Even the opening fugal theme features 2 interlocking half-step intervals. In the climax of the first movement, the first violin starts to lean heavily on a D, which in the home key of C-sharp minor creates unresolved tension only relieved when the D resolves a half step down to a C-sharp. And yet he uses the same exact pitch relationship now in reverse to suddenly transport us from the weighty melancholy of the C-sharp minor first movement into the D major second movement, an idyllic dance full of air and lightness. For the third movement, Beethoven borrows from the world of opera by using a recitative, a singing style that mimics dramatic speech, to shepherd the story forward between the more lyrical and narratively static arias. The third part is clearly a transition, transporting us into the formal center and emotional heart of the entire work, the fourth movement. In its basic form, the Andante fourth movement is an expansive theme and variation. From the very beginning, there's an element of play. The violins trade off the main theme back and forth, with the ever-important half-step interval once again outlined. The theme is simply a starting point for Beethoven to go explore faraway, fantastical lands, sometimes elegantly lilting, sometimes bucolic, sometimes even drunk and faltering. Somehow we eventually find ourselves in the most heavenly of moments in the entire piece, a variation that gently ebbs along in a state of near stasis, worlds away from the inner turmoil of that opening C-sharp minor movement. But how does one move forward from such transcendence? Abruptly, it turns out, as the cello jumpstarts the scherzo of the piece, the fifth movement. Following the literal meaning of the word scherzo, this movement is littered with jokes, chases, pranks, even featuring an early example of sul ponticello, a special technique in which we all play on the bridge, creating a glassy, distorted effect. And yet, all it takes are 3 notes to burst the bubble. We are back in minor, a brooding G-sharp minor to be exact, full of yearning and impassioned pleas. However, we find out that this 6th movement, like the 3rd, is merely a transition. We're not meant to linger as we are suddenly pulled into the finale, in which we return, finally, to the opening key of C-sharp minor, albeit this time with a fateful and defiant arrival. The melancholy and repressed fury of that first movement has now fully exploded. As Wagner wrote, "This is the fury of the world's dance. Fierce pleasure, agony, ecstasy of love, joy, anger, passion, and suffering." And above the tumult, the indomitable fiddler whirls us onto the abyss. There's a moment near the end in which D major makes an appearance, giving us a fleeting reminder of the airy, fantastical second movement. But there is no doubt in the end whose will it is that wins out. Even a sudden shift to C-sharp major at the 11th hour does not convince us that this is a story with a triumphant end. Cathartic, perhaps, but jubilant it is not.